Construction of dams can actually flood the neighboring villages and all that. So therefore, obviously people have to shift from there and move somewhere else. In Bhopal, the Union Carbide India Limited, which is a company, it was set up in the year 1934. So floodplain zoning is a measure taken to identify those areas or zones which are most affected by the floods. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to today's session on environmental studies for second semester. So in this session, let us concentrate on reasons for resettlement and rehabilitation. So in today's session, let us concentrate on reasons for resettlement and rehabilitation. So what are the reasons? Why are people resettled and rehabilitated from their actual hometowns or places where they were actually brought up? So there are a number of reasons why they are rehabilitated and resettled, and they undergo a lot of problems when they are put from one place to another place. So what are those problems faced by them? All that we shall study, and also we shall study about the disaster management of some of the natural calamities. So talking about reasons for resettlement and rehabilitation. What is resettlement? Already a group of people would have been settled in a particular area, but for some reason they are shifted from that area to another area. That is resettlement. What is rehabilitation? Means you're changing their habitat, wherein you're constructing and giving them house so that they can leave their original hometowns or homeland and move to a different place. So what are the reasons for both of this? That is resettlement and rehabilitation. So the major reasons are because of natural calamities like earthquake, cyclone, tornadoes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, flood conditions, drought condition, landslides, etc. So because of all these natural calamities, people are forced to move from their particular habitat to a different habitat. Apart from this, because of man-made disasters also, people are made to resettle and rehabilitate. What are the man-made disasters? Such as industrial accidents, because of nuclear accidents, because of oil spills, toxic contamination of the sites. So all these man-made disasters will make the place unfit for human beings to live. Therefore, they will have to move from that particular place and resettle in a different place. And also, resettlement and rehabilitation is done because of some of the developmental projects that are undertaken by the government, such as construction of dams, because construction of dams can actually flood the neighboring villages and all that. So therefore, obviously people have to shift from there and move somewhere else. So developmental projects like construction of dams, irrigation canals, construction of reservoirs, etc. And also because of some of the infrastructural projects which are taken by the government for the improvement of the country or a particular region, such as building of flyovers, bridges, roads, etc. We all have been hearing in the news, right, how government has acquired the land of the farmers or agricultural lands of the farmers, or they have acquired their house area so that in that particular area a national highway can be brought in, a bridge can be brought in, so that the infrastructure of the country will develop. So for that purpose also people are made to forcefully move from their original habitat to a different place. So these are the different reasons. Apart from that, because of transportation activities such as construction of roads, highways, canal, etc. and because of energy related projects, because of construction of power plants, oil exploration related projects, mining activities, construction of pipelines, for all this also a particular land is needed. So if the humans come in between that particular land, or the human settlement is in that particular land, they will be shifted from that land to somewhere else. Next is because of agricultural projects that are undertaken. Next is because of projects related to conservation of wildlife. So the best example I can take of is Shivamogga, wherein they wanted to make a tiger project or wanted to convert it into a tiger sanctuary so that tigers could be preserved. So whoever, villagers were living around that particular area, they were forced to leave that area and move and resettle somewhere else because of some of the conservation of wildlife related projects, because of making national parks, sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, because whenever they make a national park, sanctuary or biosphere reserve, it is a protected area. The number of animals there will increase. So if the number of animals there increase, again it will be a problem to the people living in the boundary of these national parks and all that. So therefore they will be made to forcefully leave that particular area and go and resettle somewhere else. So these are the different reasons for resettlement and rehabilitation of the people. What are the issues that can rise up because of this resettlement and rehabilitation? Let's look into. First of all, usually the tribal people are the most affected because they will first of all be poor, they'll not have much knowledge, and they can be easily manipulated by the government or the people. So they are the ones who actually suffer a lot. If the person is living above the poverty line, then maybe he can go to some other property which he actually has. But the tribal people's property is nature itself. So if you're shifting them from there and putting them somewhere else, it will lead to a lot of problems, especially in the tribal people. So the resettlement and rehabilitation usually affects the tribal people the most, as their heart and soul lies in the forest, and it is very difficult for them to adjust to the modern world. It is just like how it is very difficult for villagers to adjust to a city life, right? It will take a lot of time. That too, they will not get adjusted, but with lot of pain and hardships, they'll try to adjust. The same thing goes with the tribal people also. They have been brought up in the forest itself. Forest has been their homeland since centuries, many years, right? Now suddenly you take them away from the forest, away from nature, and put them among a crowd of other people. It is a great problem for them to adjust there. So the tribes, first of all, as I told you, they are already poor, and their resettlement further increases their poverty. So those tribes, usually they'll be depending on some of the forest products, because we had learnt in the tribal rights, right? How tribals are given the rights to use some of the forest products so that they can manufacture something out of it, or make handmade items out of it which they can sell and earn money. Or in the forest itself, they can have small plots of agricultural land. Now you're removing them from the forest and then putting them somewhere else. First of all, the tribals are poor. This will make them even more poorer, because they'll not get enough amount of income. And you put them to some construction work or any other work, they'll not know that work properly. And it is also difficult for them to work under somebody else, because they would have been leading their own independent life. So that is one of the reasons, because they will lose their land, they lose their home, they lose their food insecurity. Food insecurity will arise to them, because what they would have depended entirely on the food that is got from the forest. Now their entire diet is changed when you resettle them from the forest to somewhere else, right? So that is why it will cause a lot of food insecurity. It will cause loss of access to common property assets, and it will increase the morbidity and mortality of the tribes, because some people mentally they will become exhausted, so they lose their will to live. So it can lead to a lot of mortality rates, that is the death rate, and also it will result in social and cultural isolation, because the tribes would have their own traditions and customs which they would have followed in the forest, like praying of a particular deity, which is a tree, which is a water source or something. Now when you resettle them from that particular place into somewhere else, it is very difficult for them to adjust to the social and cultural life of that particular place. So that is why people are the most affected, because they are the ones who face the most issues when it comes to resettlement and rehabilitation. Next, one more thing is, one of the issues that they face is, or the resettled and rehabilitation. Like very recently, a year back, there was a landslide that had occurred in Madikeri, and the people were resettled. Till today, there are people who have not got proper homes. People who have lost their homes, the poor people have not got proper homes. They have been given a place, they have been rehabilitated and resettled in a particular place which is very, very far from the town. It is very difficult for those poor people to commute because it is very far. So likewise, the government, what they do is, without thinking about anything, somewhere they'll take a building, they'll build a building there and try to put the people there. But the people's lifestyle entirely will change, right, leading to a lot of problem. And apart from that, not good compensation is also not given to them. Very little compensation is given for the land that is lost, and also sometimes the compensation that is given is also hindered, or it will take a lot of time, or sometimes what happens, if the officers are corrupt, half of the compensation will go to the pocket and very little amount that is left out will be given to those people who have been resettled and rehabilitated. So all these meager compensation will cause a lot of problem to the people to resettle and rehabilitate properly. Next, people who have ancestral lands. Now, say for example, a flood has occurred or a drought condition has occurred, or you need to construct a particular building there. So what you do is, the government will try to resettle the people and rehabilitate the people in a different place. So they would have had somewhere, wherever their settlement is there itself they would have had their agricultural fields, that is ancestral properties, which they would have got from their great grandfathers. Like that, they would have acquired it. Now it is very difficult for them to leave that particular ancestral land and go. One is emotional attachment, other thing is income. The income will also be under loss. So that is the reason. So people having ancestral lands where they are used to practice agriculture for their livelihood, they will lose their livelihood, because apart from agriculture, they would not know to do any other work. And forcefully, they will have to abandon these ancestral lands and move to rehabilitation centers, and they will have to abandon agriculture and they will start to build their own livelihood just from scratch. They'll have to learn new techniques, they'll have to adjust to that particular place, and from scratch they will have to build their livelihood again, making them even more poorer. So that is also one of the issues. Next is, the rehabilitation center usually will lack basic facilities, and it will lack some of the basic infrastructures which these people would have enjoyed in their previous regions wherever they were staying. Say for example, I told you that area might have been very close to the town. Now you build a complex for them, or a housing complex for them, very far from the town, and you make them move there for the children to go to school, for people to go to work, even to buy anything small also, to go to the town and buy it. It will be very difficult for them, because they would be accustomed to living in areas near to the town, but you have put them somewhere very far. So that is also one of the reason, because of the lack of basic facilities. Next is lack of nutrition, especially for those who depend on agriculture and forest based products. So some of the people, they usually don't buy anything from outside. They grow their own crops, they grow their own vegetables. For such people, or for example the tribes, they don't buy anything from outside. Whatever is available in the forest, that only they will eat. Now we are putting them somewhere else, their entire diet will change, and therefore it will lead to lack of nutrition in these people, leading to malnutrition, and also it will increase a number of health issues in the rehabilitated and the resettled people. So these are some of the issues that the rehabilitated and resettled people will have to face because of natural calamities, because of infrastructural developments that are undertaken by the government, and so on. So next, talking about a case study. So here this is one of the topic that is given in your syllabus. Case studies on resettlement and rehabilitation of project affected person. So here I have taken a very common case study which most of you all know about it. That is the Bhopal gas tragedy, because this was the biggest gas tragedy that occurred in India. So because of Bhopal gas tragedy, what and all problems people had to face? They had to be resettled, they had to be rehabilitated in a different area. So what are the problems they faced? What exactly happened in Bhopal gas tragedy? All that we shall look into. So you'll get a number of case studies in Google itself. So you can just browse. One of the case studies I've just taken and put it here. So Bhopal is actually the capital of Madhya Pradesh, and in Bhopal, the Union Carbide India Limited, which is a company, it was set up in the year 1934. So why was this company set up in Bhopal? So we all know about Green Revolution, right? We have studied about this in one of the sessions of previous units. What is Green Revolution? Green Revolution is nothing but wherein the government of India went in for Green Revolution, wherein they started manufacturing more of chemical fertilizers in order to improve the quality of the crop so that the scarcity of food can be reduced in a country. So that is Green Revolution, wherein a lot of chemical factories, fertilizer factories and all came into existence. It was because of this Green Revolution itself, or to fulfill the demands of the people for agricultural fertilizers and for pesticides as per the Green Revolution in India, in the year 1934, a new factory, that is Union Carbide India Limited factory, was set up in Bhopal. So what was the function of the factory? The main aim of the factory was to produce agricultural chemicals and pesticides. So on the night of December 3rd, 1984, due to water entering the storage tank, there was heavy rains or something had happened wherein the water started entering into the storage tanks of this particular industry. So this entering of the storage tank, actually it entered into the storage tanks which were containing the poisonous gases. So what happened here was, because of the entering of the water, the poisonous gases started to escape from the storage tank and it started to spread over the city. So here the tank got overflowed. So when the overflow of the tank occurred because of the entry of the water into the tank, these chemicals and fertilizers or the harmful gases were there. It spread to the entire city, leaving thousands of dead. People didn't even know what was happening. They actually, when they were sleeping itself, thousands of people died because of inhalation of this poisonous gas that leaked from this particular Union Carbide India Limited factory, which was supposed to manufacture fertilizers and chemicals. So thousands of people died in this particular Bhopal gas tragedy. So apart from that, now that area became polluted. The air became polluted. Can people live there? No. They had to be resettled and rehabilitated to different places, wherein there also they had to face a lot of problems. So if you just go through this Bhopal gas tragedy, you'll get detailed information about it. So I've just given a little information about what actually Bhopal gas tragedy was. So because of the resettlement, they had to face a lot of issues, and apart from that, because of the gas that was inhalation of the gas that leaked, they had a lot of health issues and all that. And though they were resettled, because of the health issues, they could not go to work. They even became even more poorer. So all those problems they had to face. So just go through this Bhopal gas tragedy and you'll get a complete detail about it. So this was one of the awful disasters that had happened in India, in Bhopal, in Madhya Pradesh, because of the Union Carbide India Limited factory, because of their negligence. So this was about Bhopal gas tragedy. Next, let's study about disaster management. So, I told you, actually because of these disasters occurring, that is, be it natural calamities, because of man-made disasters, because of that only people are forced to resettle and rehabilitate or move from their original habitat, live in a other place wherever the government has provided them. So, for that, what can we do? We can manage the disaster. So, let's study about disaster management. So, disaster management is the stream of effectively preparing, responding and managing the disasters in order to lessen the harm caused by the natural calamities. Disaster management is also a subject which usually art students can pursue. So, it is a very interesting subject. So, here also you will have a lot of field works and all that, wherein during disasters what has to be done, all that will be taught to you, so that whenever there is a disaster, for example a landslide, it is the disaster management people who go there to rescue those people. So, this is about disaster management. So, if we need to avoid unnecessary resettlement and rehabilitation of people, we need to know disaster management. So, disaster management, there are natural calamities and how to manage them. It is given in your syllabus. So, we will study about each of them. So, first we will learn about disaster management of floods. So, what is flood? Flood usually occurs because of heavy rainfall, wherein the rain will not be able to seep through the ground properly, and therefore it will result in accumulation of the rain on the surface of the soil, leading to flood-like conditions. The best example we can take of is recently Chennai floods that had occurred, and now there are some floods that is ongoing. So, here disaster management of floods, how can it be managed? Floods can be managed by flood forecasting, by reduction of runoff, by reducing flood peaks by volume reduction, reducing the levels of the flood, and by floodplain zoning. So, each of these we shall study one by one. So, how is flood forecasting done in order to manage the flood disaster? So, flood forecasting is a method, like how forecasting means prior itself predicting. So, say for example, if there is a cyclone, first itself they will tell the people, okay, this place is going to be affected by the cyclone. Move away from there, take whatever is necessary so that the people's life will not be lost. So, that is about in the case of cyclone. Or weather predicting, just like that flood forecasting is also prior itself people will be notified saying this area is going to be flooded because of the heavy monsoon rains, please leave the area and go to a rehabilitation center. So, this flood forecasting is the method of predicting or estimating the size, the time and the duration of future water levels or water flows based on the precipitation, that is rainfall, based on the characteristics of the river in that particular region, so that we can easily prevent damage to the environment, property and also human life. So, prior itself if people are informed about it, they can move away from that particular place. So, that is flood forecasting. So, next is reduction of runoff. So, runoff water can be reduced by disconnecting or redirecting the downspout. So, first itself if we come to know that flood will occur in that particular place, we can try to prior itself we can make some construction arrangements wherein the floods can be diverted to different places so that the water doesn't get accumulated in the lowlands. So, that is what is done in reduction of runoff. So, runoff water can be reduced by disconnecting or redirecting the downspout by using rain barrels to capture rain from your roof. So, by building huge rain barrels so that whatever heavy rain is falling on the roof, instead of it falling to the ground, it can be collected in these barrels. Or planting a rain garden or planting trees, because trees also reduce water runoff, therefore reduction of flood. Reducing impervious surfaces. So, impervious surfaces means Why do you think usually flood occurs in cities, especially Bangalore? Any small rainfall, the city will flood. Why is that? Because nowhere you find soil. Everywhere it is pavement, cements only. How will the water seep to the ground? So that is what. And also there will be flyovers which gets blocked, no proper drainage. All that will lead to flooding condition. So that is why reducing impervious surfaces. So keeping the surfaces natural as it is, not building cement, not putting pavements on them, not cementing them, so that water can easily seep into the ground, preventing flooding. Then installing impermeable pavements. So if at all pavement is needed to beautify the city also, install such pavements or use such pavements which will actually allow the water to seep through it. And planting green roof. So green roof with a garden or something, so that those green roofs will absorb water and the water will not run off to the below ground levels. Next is by reducing flood peaks. So flood peaks can be reduced by constructing dams that are capable of holding huge water during flood. What can happen? So heavy water, heavy rain is there, whatever water falls on that particular river or something, that can be stored in the dams, so therefore preventing flood. Next is by constructing ponds, tanks, surface storage structures, etc. By making detention basins such as marshes. Marshes has the largest capacity to hold water. So creating marshes in those particular areas wherever flood is there, or marshy areas. By old quarries. So old quarries, already they would have dug the stone and made it into a hollow area. So therefore such quarries also can become collection centers, therefore preventing flood. And also mines can become collection centers, and they can also be a source of water storage, thereby reducing flood peaks. So this is about reducing flood peaks. Next is by reducing the level of the flood. So the level of the flood can be reduced by diverting the streams or channelizing the streams to direct water canals. So canals are the ones that are constructed by man. So if the streams are directed towards the canal, then excess of water that is falling on the stream enter into the canal and not enter into nearby villages or human settlement. Next, by deepening, widening, straightening, lining and cleaning out vegetation and debris from the river channel. So not just directing the water to the channels is important or canals is important, but any blockage in the canal, that also should be removed. Otherwise, if you are directing water also, the water will not be able to enter into river channels or canals. Next, deepening and widening the river channels, which will increase the flood holding capacity of the river, and also by diverting the flood water into marshes, lakes, then into depressions and spreading it thinly over paddy fields and desert drylands. So towards desert drylands also we can divert the flood. So therefore we prevent flooding. For example, Punjab and Rajasthan are lying nearby. So if there is a flood-like situation in Punjab, that water can be diverted towards the Rajasthan deserts. So therefore the desert sand, it is very, very porous, it will absorb lot of water, therefore preventing flood. So that is how you can rechannelize the flood. This is about reducing flood levels. Next, by floodplain zoning. So floodplain zoning is a measure taken to identify those areas or zones which are most affected by the floods. And how is the zoning done? So here the flood prone areas are divided into different zones, so that people occupying these flood zones can leave the zones for their own safety. And it also prevents the risk of flooding and also prevents the building of roads and construction, therefore preventing impermeability of water. Now we have identified a flood zone, which is most of the time, quite often it is flooded in the monsoon season. Now what we can do is we can prior itself tell the people don't build your houses there, though that area is prone to floods, or don't have agricultural fields there. That area is prone to floods. So prior itself if you inform them, then they will find a property somewhere else. So therefore the property of the people can also be safeguarded, the lives of the people can also be safeguarded. And also we can try preventing or constructing buildings and roads in that particular area where flooding is most common. So that is what is done in floodplain zoning. Prior itself identifying some of the areas which are heavily prone to floods most of the time, therefore preventing the use of such areas, leaving the areas to nature itself as such. That is floodplain zoning. So next let's study about disaster management of earthquake. If an earthquake occurs, what can be done? So for earthquake, there are pre-disaster management strategies. That is, before the earthquake comes, what all management strategies we can follow, and after an earthquake, what are the management strategies that can be followed. So pre-disaster management strategies for earthquake. First is pre means before itself. So here constructing buildings that can withstand earthquake to some extent. And next important factor here is building infrastructure that is resistant to earthquake, adopting proper water supply systems, communication network, proper electricity lines, etc., which are earthquake proof, meaning these water supply systems, communication facilities, electric lines nothing should happen to it even though earthquake occurs. They should be earthquake proof. Next, including curriculum, that is including lessons in school education and making the public understand or aware of the precautionary measures to be taken during an earthquake. So usually school children will be taught whenever there is an earthquake or whenever there is a light seismic wave, just run out of the buildings, or if the table, whichever desk you're sitting, if it is quite strong, go under the desk. So that is what they're taught, like during the time of such disasters what can be done. So such measures should be taken during an earthquake which will minimize the loss of life. So the best thing is, usually it is said that wherever there is a door, there you can go and stand in that frame of the door, so that if anything is falling, it will not fall on you. So all that little things can be taught to the people and to the school children, so that they can, if they are in school and an earthquake occurs, they can manage by themselves. So that is why these disaster management strategies should be included in the curriculum also. Next is post-disaster management strategy. So after an earthquake occurs, how can you manage the disaster? So immediate rescue and relief measures should be taken by building temporary shelters soon after an earthquake. Otherwise what happens? People might get stuck in the rumble and help will not come. And even though help comes, if proper rehabilitation centers are not there for them, where will they go and stay? Because they would have lost their property. You can't prevent an earthquake, but you can minimize the loss of life by doing all this. Next, proper medical care should be given for the injured people. Dead bodies should be recovered and their proper disposal should be done. Otherwise, what will happen? It will lead to spread of a lot of diseases. Next, supply proper food and clean water timely to the earthquake affected people. Then, very soon, repair the lines of communication and electricity. And next, restore the transportation routes. Why restoring the transportation routes is very important is, somewhere you have to take them to a bigger hospital, and if the roads are blocked, it will be a problem. So as soon as an earthquake occurs, first step is to clear the transport and also clear or repair the communication lines, the telephone lines, the electricity lines and all that. Next, let's talk about disaster management of cyclones. So what to do when a cyclone occurs? So first is predicting the areas. First itself predicting which areas are more prone or vulnerable to cyclones by hazard mapping and therefore avoiding settlements in such vulnerable areas. There can be some areas which are more prone to cyclones, maybe some coastal regions and all that. So, first itself, the geologists can predict such areas and tell the people not to settle in such areas so that the life can be saved. Next is constructing engineering structures that can withstand the cyclone. Next is those infrastructures which are not of good quality or which are vulnerable to cyclones should have steep slope roof constructed to avoid the risk of being blown away. So, if the roof of the houses are steep, then the effect by the wind is very, very minimal when compared to the flat roofs. Such strategies can be followed for construction of houses and infrastructure. Next is by providing a strong base for the building so that the building itself doesn't get carried away by the cyclones. Next is by breaking the force of wind by planting trees at safe distances. We all know that trees act as barrier against the winds. That is why in some of the crop fields also, around the crop field, big huge trees will be planted because it will cut the wind. So, when the wind gets cutted, the crops will not fall off on the ground and it will not be a loss to the farmer. Same strategy can be followed here. Whichever area is prone to a cyclone, far from that human settlement, like a boundary, raise trees so that the trees will cut the velocity of the wind. Next, repairing of shelters before the arrival of cyclones. So, some of the areas which are more prone to cyclones, in the house itself, they'll have underground shelters which would have been damaged because of previous cyclone. So, that underground shelters should be reconstructed before or repaired before another cyclone sets in. And cyclone shelters should be constructed in safe areas by the community people itself or by the government of the regions which are most prone to cyclone. So, sometimes it is not possible for everyone to have their own shelters. So, the government people or that community, somewhere in a safe zone, they can build a very strong, sturdy cyclone shelter so that first itself, if the government say that this area is going to be hit by a cyclone, then the people can move to those shelters very, very fast. Next, proper flood management. So, cyclone can also increase the flood condition because whenever there is a cyclone, heavy rains also tend to come. So, during that time, proper flood management should also be taken care of as cyclone can bring in heavy rains. And by planting mangrove trees. So, mangroves usually they have good water permeability. They have the capacity to absorb, like sponge, how sponge can absorb water to a larger capacity, right? Just like that, mangrove forest also can absorb too much of moisture, excess of moisture. So, therefore, planting mangrove trees and increasing public awareness about the measures that can be followed to minimize the loss due to cyclone. So, all this like not constructing heavy, not spending too much on houses. Like you might have seen those areas which are more prone to cyclone, what they'll have very miniature houses, right, with made of cardboard and all that. So that if it flies off also, no problem, they can just rebuild it with a minimal amount. So, all that strategies can be followed by the people. Next is disaster management of landslides. So, landslides usually occur during the rainy season. So, to prevent landslide, here also landslide hazard zonation mapping should be carried out. Wherever there is possibility of landslide, prior itself the geologist should inform the government so that the government will not give those areas for people to build houses and all that. That can be done. And slopy mountains should be covered by natural vegetation. You might have seen in some of the mountains, deliberately or purposely they'll grow grasses. so that grasses can hold the soil tightly and it can prevent the runoff of the soil from these mountains, therefore preventing landslide. So especially natural vegetation with species that are suitable for that particular area, and also any existing natural grasslands and vegetation on the slopes should be preserved so that it will hold the soil tight and will not lead to sliding of the soil or the land. Next is detailed study of the region should be prior itself undertaken before carrying out any developmental activity in those regions, such as constructing roads, irrigation canals, etc. Even though slopes are suitable for constructing purposes, building setup should not be constructed in the slopes as it can block the pathway of the natural water flow, because slopes usually is meant for flow of water. Now there itself, if you start constructing houses and all that, you yourself are blocking the so that is movement of water. Therefore when the water comes gushing from the slope, it will result in sliding of the land. So all that should be avoided. Next is avoid settlements in areas or building houses in areas which are prone to landslides. Next is strictly prohibit construction of buildings in areas beyond a certain degree slope. So with slight slope, their buildings can be built, but very steep slope or a certain degree of slope which is mentioned by the geologist, such areas should be avoided in order to avoid landslide. So this was about the session wherein we learnt about the rehabilitation and resettlement, what are the reasons for it and what issues people face during rehabilitation and resettlement. And also we learnt about the natural calamities because of which people are forced to move from their original habitat. So how can we manage such disasters? All that we learned. So in the next session of this unit, we shall learn about environmental movements. So to preserve the nature, to preserve the environment, some movements have been undertaken or some environmental related activities have been undertaken by the people, such as the Chipko movement, the Silent Valley movement and the Bishnois of Rajasthan. So we learn about these three. So this is very interesting. So with these three interesting topics, we shall meet in the next coming session. Thank you.